It was a cold, foggy evening in the small town of Ravenswood. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the occasional howl of the wind. Detective Arthur Blake sat in his dimly lit office, sipping on a cup of black coffee. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, reminding him of the long night ahead. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It was soft but urgent. Blake raised an eyebrow. Visitors at this hour were rare. "Come in," he called out. The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside. She was dressed in a long, dark coat, and her face was pale. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small, zebra-striped box. "Detective Blake," she whispered, "I need your help. Something terrible has happened." Blake gestured for her to sit down. "Take a deep breath and tell me everything," he said calmly. The woman introduced herself as Claire Bennett. She was a nurse at Ravenswood Hospital. Earlier that day, she had found her colleague, Dr. Edward Grayson, dead in his office. The police had ruled it as a heart attack, but Claire was convinced it was murder. "Why do you think it was murder?" Blake asked, leaning forward. Claire opened the zebra-striped box and pulled out a small, handmade heart-shaped pendant. It was painted in black and white stripes, like a zebra. "This was found in Dr. Grayson's hand," she said. "He was clutching it when he died. I've never seen it before, and it doesn't belong to him. I think it's a clue." Blake examined the pendant carefully. It was unusual, to say the least. "Do you know anyone who might have wanted to harm Dr. Grayson?" he asked. Claire hesitated. Dr. Grayson was a brilliant man, but he had his enemies. He was working on a secret project at the hospital, a new medicine that could cure a rare disease. Many people were interested in his work, but he refused to share it with anyone. He said it wasn't ready yet. Blake nodded. "I'll look into it. Can you take me to the hospital? I'd like to see the scene of the crime." The hospital was eerily quiet when they arrived. Claire led Blake to Dr. Grayson's office. The room was neat and orderly, except for the desk, where papers were scattered everywhere. Blake noticed a half-empty cup of coffee on the table. "Did Dr. Grayson have any visitors before he died?" Blake asked. Clara thought for a moment. "Yes, a man came to see him earlier. I didn't recognize him, but he seemed nervous. He left in a hurry." Blake's eyes narrowed. "Can you describe him?" "He was tall, with a scar on his left cheek. He was wearing a black coat and carried a briefcase." Blake made a mental note of the description. He then turned his attention to the zebra-striped pendant. "Do you know what this symbolizes?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "No, but it reminds me of something Dr. Grayson once said. He told me that the key to his research was hidden in plain sight, like a zebra in the wild. He said it was all about patterns." Blake frowned. "Patterns?" He looked around the room, searching for anything that stood out. His eyes landed on a bookshelf filled with medical journals. One of the books was slightly out of place. He pulled it out and found a hidden compartment behind it. Inside was a small notebook. The notebook was filled with Dr. Grayson's notes and sketches. Blake flipped through the pages until he found a drawing of the zebra-striped heart. Beneath it was a cryptic message: "The heart holds the truth. Follow the stripes." Blake's mind raced. What did it mean? He looked at the pendant again and noticed something he hadn't seen before. The stripes were not random. They formed a pattern. When he held the pendant up to the light, the stripes aligned to reveal a series of numbers, 7, 12, 21. "These numbers must be a code," Blake muttered. He turned to Clara. "Do they mean anything to you?" Clara's eyes widened. "Yes. They're the numbers of a safe in the hospital's storage room. Only a few people know about it. Blake and Clara hurried to the storage room. The safe was hidden behind a stack of boxes. Blake entered the code, and the safe clicked open. Inside was a small vial of clear liquid and a note. The note read, "To whoever finds this, beware. This formula is both a cure and a curse. It must not fall into the wrong hands." Blake held up the vial. "This must be the medicine Dr. Grayson was working on," he said. "But why would someone kill him for it?" Before Clara could answer, they heard footsteps behind them. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, with a scar on his left cheek. "You're too late, detective," the man sneered. "That formula belongs to me now." Blake recognized him immediately. It was Victor Kane, a notorious criminal who had been involved in illegal drug trafficking. "Kane," Blake said coldly, "I should have known you'd be behind this." Kane smirked. Dr. Grayson was a fool. He thought he could keep this formula to himself. "But I have people willing to pay a fortune for it." Blake clenched his fists. "You won't get away with this." Kane pulled out a gun. "I think I will. Now, hand over the formula, or things will get messy." Blake hesitated, but he had no choice. He handed over the vial. Kane laughed and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, Claire stepped forward. "You forgot something," she said, holding up the zebra-striped pendant. Kane's eyes widened in shock. "Where did you get that?" Clara smiled. "It's a reminder that every crime leaves a pattern, and patterns can be followed." Before Kane could react, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police burst into the room, surrounding him. Blake looked at Clara in surprise. "You called the police?" Clara nodded. "I had a feeling things might get dangerous. I thought it was best to be prepared." Later that night, Blake sat in his office, reflecting on the case. The zebra-striped heart had led him to the truth, just as Dr. Grayson had intended. The formula was safe, and Victor Kane was behind bars. As for Clara, she had proven to be a valuable ally. Blake couldn't help but admire her courage and quick thinking. He picked up the pendant and examined it one last time. The stripes seemed to shimmer in the light, a reminder that even in the darkest mysteries, there was always a pattern to be found. And with that, Detective Arthur Blake closed the case of the zebra-striped heart.